a pretty interesting story developing in the SEC with Texas and Oklahoma leaving and the Big 12 twisting in the wind. I thought it was very interesting yesterday. Sources indicating to us that one of the reasons that the Big 12 has struggled so much, and I don't think this is a secret, this has been well written, but one of the reasons the Big 12 struggled so much is they did not have a marquee program, which when you consider the scope and the reach and the size of Texas football, that's a bit of a shocking characterization. But isn't that very true? We now know that Greg Sankey has for weeks been touting the fact that the SEC has accounted for more than 40% of the college football playoff participants, and the Big 12 has had 2 teams in the college football playoff. And Texas's struggle, I don't think you can look at it any other way now. With the resurgence of Texas, and yes, I know many of you are upset that, in fact, Texas is back. But with Texas returning to prominence in college football, now heading to the SEC, you can't get away from the fact that during these negotiations for the Big Ten and the SEC, that Texas's lack of appearances in the college football postseason has undeniably now damaged the Big 12, left the Big 12, and the ACC is in the exact same position, but they are now under the thumb of the SEC and the Big Ten. There's no way to spin that. The SEC and the Big Ten are going to make substantially more money and have substantially more influence on the future and the direction of college football, and in fact, who wins the national championship of college football, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But it is very difficult to deny now that Texas's lack of appearances in the college football postseason, there, whether it be the BCS at post Mac Brown, the college football playoff up until this past season, Jake, I think it's hard to argue that Texas has not damaged the Big 12.
Absolutely. And I think the really tough conundrum for the Big 12 right now is, like, obviously everyone wants to say, hey, you guys just lost Texas and Oklahoma. But at the same time, when Texas and Oklahoma were in your conference, it wasn't like they were lighting up the college football playoff or the postseason in college football. And so it used to be, hey, yeah, sure, the Big 12's got Texas, they got Oklahoma, they've got the one-off, TCU team every once in a while, but it's not like the Big 12 was dominating. It's not like they were getting the lion's share of appearances, to say the least. And I think when we look at the changing landscape in college football, and you look at the fact that, in this new expanded format, the SEC's pulling in 58% of total revenue. That's the SEC in the Big Ten. That's wild to me, because you're putting these two conferences in a position to leave conferences like the Big 12 behind. And the real problem is the Big 12 doesn't, at least in football, have a way to get back. You're going to have to take programs that typically haven't been in the college football playoff, and you're going to have to find a way to start participating at a higher level. You're going to have to get in more often. And I'm not quite sure what that looks like for the Big 12, because again, and it's no hate for any individual program in the Big 12, but you look at the different situations in the Big 12 right now, and it's not like there's one where you're like, hey, yeah, they're definitely going to be a threat for the college football playoff. I mean, the ACC, as an example, only really has Florida State. I mean, if Clemson next year pops off, I guess that's not that surprising. But I just look at both of these conferences, and in the Big 12 specifically, there's not a lot of momentum to get into the college football playoff right now. Like, you're going to need, like, it'd be nice if Texas Tech woke up a little bit under Joey. It would be nice if Oklahoma State was even competitive against Texas in the Big 12 championship game, which they weren't. You showed how you showed your class in that game. And TCU, I don't know what TCU is going to be. So then I look at the teams that are coming into the conference, and I say, okay, well, those teams aren't exactly lighting the world on fire either. So I don't know how the Big 12, gets back into the conversation, gets back into a strong place, unless one of these football programs just absolutely turns it around. Because ultimately, we all know what's going to happen. The SEC and the Big Ten are going to continue to dominate the spots. And because of that, they're going to continue to dominate the conversation. And we haven't even gotten into the God tier, totally changing the format conversation.
Yeah, I don't think that matters. I think what you're looking at is a situation where the Big 12 and the ACC now are forever damaged. There's no way to recover from the money that they're not going to make. And it's why I continue to say you've got to beat the drum to expand the college basketball money pot somehow. And if that is the NCAA tournament, if that is this midseason NIL thing that they're trying to put together, I don't know how you go about doing that, but you can't allow the SEC and the Big Ten to just run away with your booty. Like, that's what you're doing here. You're giving them, as Ross Dellinger first reported yesterday, your presidents in the Big 12 and the ACC voted to go along with this revenue structure, which I think they had no choice but to do that. But if you're the Big 12, if Texas had not gone what felt like 100 years without winning a Big 12 championship, if Texas had not gone through the Tom Herman era, if Texas had not been, frankly, a pretty shitty football program for the better part of a decade, you're probably in a much better position. You're probably making more money. I think we're in this place now where it's hard to argue that winning on the field is what Greg Sankey is standing on top of.
Mm-hmm.
And he is saying, we've made more money than you. We deserve to make more money than you. And I think it is a really difficult place for the Big 12 and the ACC. And then I look at these comments from North Carolina and Bubba Cunningham, the athletic director at North Carolina. And I asked myself, is Florida State truly the tipping point in the ACC, or is it North Carolina? When Bubba Cunningham says, I also think we have to look at what's in the best interest of the university today and going forward, and I think we can do both. That's a big tip of the cap to maybe we should get the F out of here, right? And you look at, don't go past what Bubba Cunningham said here in the last sentence, which is maybe if we can get more into the ACC network, which is Latin for ESPN, support the ACC network, which is, again, ESPN, drive subscribers, get more digital content, then we can have direct-to-consumer relationships. So what is Bubba Cunningham saying there? Yeah, we want to leave the ACC, but we're in business with ESPN.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is a very, very interesting paradox that you have right now for the Big 12 and the ACC. If you have membership, and I don't think there's anybody looking to get out of the Big 12, I truly do not. But I think if you have membership in the ACC, Florida State, North Carolina, Miami certainly has to be in that conversation. Who the hell knows what NC State's trying to do or what they're thinking about? But you have probably half a dozen brands in the ACC that would walk out the door today if they could.
Yeah, and I think the hard part is that, the further and further away the SEC and the Big Ten get with revenue, the more and more incentivized, schools like UNC are going to be to find their way into a better situation. And so, I appreciate Bubba Cunningham's tact there with what he said. He could have just come out and said, hey, we need to make more money. We're going to try and do that through ESPN. But at least he did it tactfully, right? He appreciates the value of relationships. And that's what I think, at least in the ACC, that's the other interesting angle when you talk about schools getting into better situations. Like, we've talked so much about how Florida State doesn't exactly have a great reputation for managing relationships and representing their conference well. So when you look at schools like UNC going to the Big Ten, let's say, as an example, at some point, who knows if that's going to happen. But if that were to happen, they would be more welcome because of stuff like this. They understand how to play the game. So I just think we're in this time where, again, at some point we're going to have to face the idea and the conundrum of what do we do with the schools that have major brand power, like the UNCs of the world, and what do we do with the folks who don't have as much? Because I think that's, we're already seeing that in the top rank, but we're going to see that bleed down through the rest of these conferences, through the bottom half. And I think that's a scary proposition when you've got folks like Greg Byrne at Alabama saying, hey, dude, we're money's not endless. We'll cut sports if we have to. That's a wild thing to say when you're at Alabama. You're not at, Vanderbilt. You're not at, whatever smaller time school you want to point to. So I just think that this it's all cool if you want to make more money, right? If you want to say, hey, we've got 40% participation rate in the college football playoff in its existence. Okay, cool. Great. But what do you do about everybody else? Because I don't think you can just hang them out to dry. You can't do that.
Yeah, and I also think that North Carolina is what props up the ACC. I will forever say that I think that Florida State is a pretty mediocre football program. And I think, post Bobby Bowden, all they've been is a pretty mediocre football program. And Leonard Hamilton's done nice things. North Carolina is the brand. North Carolina is the actual heartbeat of Tobacco Road. Like, you look at what the ACC is. The ACC is Tobacco Road. That now the fellas down there in Tallahassee want to argue about that. Well, you can argue all day, and you can cry until the roosters come home. But I'm telling you right now, in my opinion, the heartbeat of the ACC is North Carolina. And if you lose North Carolina, there is no path to survival. If you lose North Carolina, that league comes to an end, whether Florida State's there or not. You lose North Carolina, you're probably going to lose Duke. You're probably going to lose North Carolina State, I would think. Right, you don't have a league without North Carolina.
Well, and I think we've seen this story before, right? I mean, obviously, USC leaves the Pac-12 in the way they did, and then UCLA goes with them, and then Colorado goes, and all of a sudden here we are, right? And I think it's that same situation for the ACC. You're totally right. Like, if UNC goes, Duke's definitely going to go, and at that point, you're just talking about how you want to pack up the van and leave, because that's the position you put people in, right? We're no longer in a position of like hoping that we're going to get revenue enough to continue our athletic programs. These schools now have to say, no, we're not going to hope. We're going to take actions into our own hands, and we're going to do what we need to do. But in the ACC, again, the conundrum is, and I think this is why, Cunningham's talking so much about the ACC network, ESPN. How do we get out of the grant of rights, right? Like, if we're going to leave a conference, if we're going to talk about making that kind of change, what does that look like? Because we signed this agreement, and Florida State's showing us there's no getting out of that agreement. So ESPN truly is the only path to making a change, whether that is the Big Ten or whatever it winds up being. And that in the ACC, I think, is what is so difficult when you're sitting there looking at, these two conferences making so much more money than you're about to make.
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of times we make this more complicated than it has to be. And I just think that you look at the role that ESPN has played and will play. And I think these meetings this week where, I think it's pretty clear that we're going to get finality in this college football playoff revenue model. I think ESPN's extension that starts in 2026 is going to get finalized. I think that it's pretty clear now that, at least from what we're told, the SEC and the Big Ten will not get automatic bye weeks handed to them, which I think was the bargaining chip. And we talked about that on the show. We had heard that was going to be a bargaining chip for the Big 12 and the ACC. And I think, really what the SEC and the Big Ten there is they threw those two conferences a bone that they knew they didn't even. I mean, I don't believe the SEC and the Big Ten ever thought they could get that. I think they threw out the automatic buys just so that they could say, well, look, we acquiesced. We negotiated. We didn't get everything we wanted. They got everything they wanted. They wanted full financial control of the college football playoff, and they wanted full access control to the college football playoff, which is exactly what they got, because access is how you make money. And if you don't have access to the college football playoff, which I think most teams in this country do not, and I know, hey, Monty, they expanded to 16. That's great. Do you really think that the scheduling advantage that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have in the regular season? Why do you think this conversation about 9 conference games is so significant? Because it limits access to others to the college football playoff. I don't know what ultimately happens with the G5. And again, this comes back around to this Notre Dame conversation. Notre Dame's got a guaranteed between 2 and 5%. 2 and 5% revenue share automatically. Doesn't matter what happens to their football season. They could go winless. They're getting their 2 to 5% every year. Like, that's called controlling access.
Yeah, and I think, that goes right up the alley of either winning or having a strong brand, right? Because Notre Dame, obviously, we've talked so much about how Notre Dame isn't in the college football playoff every single year, right? I mean, obviously, they're not, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan. They're not those juggernauts, but what they are unequivocally is one of the strongest brands in college football. And every single time they're on TV, they're drawing a huge audience, which is why they're getting that type of leverage play. And that's why I say, like, I just think, it's Notre Dame in that way is fortunate that they have the heritage they have, and they have the brand, and they've worked so hard to cultivate that and continue the USC rivalry and all that good stuff. But again, I every time we talk about this, I think about, when the college football playoff started in 2015, I don't think anybody was really thinking about, hey, like, what happens 10 years from now when we know who's dominated this thing, right? All we were focused on is, hey, we need a new model. We're tired of computers deciding who does what. That's all we were focused on. And now it's like, hey, okay, these two conferences have dominated and Notre Dame's a good brand, so the three of them are going to get in, and everybody else is just kind of chilling.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me. It's amazing how that works.
So I go back to the original point of, what if Texas hadn't gone 17 years between appearances in championship games or in championship structures, right? What if, because you think back to Mac Brown and you think back to, what was that, 2005. I mean, you fell off the map after that. And were you relevant? At times. But you look at the struggles of the Texas football program under Charlie Strong, under Tom Herman. I mean, it was barren.
Because it's garbage.
In Tom Herman's 5 years, while not horrendous, and everybody always points to the fact that Tom Herman went 4-0 in bowl games. Who cares? Like, I look at his best year was 2018 at 10-4. And you really weren't that close. You really weren't that close. And Charlie Strong was an absolute disaster. There's no way around that. And really, at the end of the day, at probably the last, 4 years of Mac Brown, you weren't really relevant. You weren't. And you go past, I don't know what they went to the BCS championship game, I guess, in Mac's last best year, that 13-1 year. Even if you stretch it to 2009, you're still talking about 13 years of just not being relevant.
Yes.
Not winning conference championships, not compete. How much money did the Big-12 lose? Not having Texas as a perennial contender.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is a lot. I think it is significant.
Yeah, and I think it's more money than you can gain back by being a great basketball conference now. I mean, that's just too much.
And yet, you let Texas control the conference. You let Texas have an inordinate amount of sway and influence. You let Texas then just walk out the door to the SEC, which, hey, maybe you had no choice, right? Your grant of rights was up. I totally get it. But did you really fight for that? And again, I'll go to Mike Gundy. This is why Mike Gundy, being such a mediocre, not championship caliber football coach, you don't have a big brand in this conference. What is the football brand in the Big 12 right now?
I mean, Utah, but that's it.
Utah is the best football program in the conference. So not only did Texas not win, when they finally got back, now they're leaving. That's the amazing part of it. And we want to sit here and I think we want to laud over it. It truly is Oklahoma State. It is absolutely now for this conference, because every year, and with expansion and realignment, it gets tougher and tougher to reach back in time.
Yeah.
Tough. Like, you look at this Trev Alberts move, leaving Nebraska. Would Trev Alberts have ever left Nebraska if Nebraska had stayed in the Big 8, Big 12? If in 2011 they hadn't made that just horrendous decision to chase the bag of money and go to the Big 10. And I also look at the brand that Nebraska was. Nebraska is irrelevant. Nebraska is invisible. Trev Alberts left Nebraska to go to Texas A&M yesterday. Just walked out the door. Trev Alberts is Nebraska football, which is problematic in its own.
Right.
And I actually love Trev. I've worked with him a lot in TV. But Trev Alberts, there was no, in his prime as a football player, there was no greater Nebraska Cornhusker than Trev Alberts. That guy was an absolute machine. And now you're going to hire your fifth athletic director since 2011? That's unbelievable.
And again, going to A&M, like not that there's probably a real clean-cut logical move for a guy like Trev after Nebraska, as you point out. Like, obviously, there's history there, but I'm telling you, you're going to, as an athletic director and an administrator, you need to jump on the train of a program that at least has the opportunity. And I'm not saying that if Nebraska was an undefeated, 12-0 team or whatever, that they wouldn't be in there, because they would be in there, right? But how far away are you from that at Nebraska, even with the current situation? So then you look at A&M and you're like, well, A&M's been pretty tumultuous. A&M has been, the Jimbo situation was pretty brutal. But at least at A&M, you can say, hey, if we win, we're going to climb very quickly. And I'm going to guess that Trev feels like he can turn that around a little bit.
Yeah, I think I don't know what it is. You can't tell me it's strictly a money thing. I just think it is. Again, it's this indictment on realignment, and I think it is the tragedy that ultimately, at the end of the day, if the Big 12 goes away at some point, you're going to point to these decisions where, because like Missouri, irrelevant in the SEC, irrelevant, invisible in the SEC.
But
like,
at
just
least for
doesn't,
them, they're making money, right? I mean,
just doesn't matter.
Like,
you're not competing for national championships. You're not, like, I look at these teams that wound up leaving the Big 12, and I don't know that the grass is always greener. Texas, the grass is going to be greener. I have no idea what the future at Oklahoma football is. I have no idea, because it would have been unthinkable 10 years ago to think Nebraska in 10 years won't have competed for anything in college football, and they haven't. Is there any surefire bet or belief that Venables is going to be able to compete at the top of the SEC? I mean, I would like to think so. It's OU. But I have no doubt Texas can, because Texas is that indelible brand. They are that behemoth.
yes.
So I don't know. Anyway, all of that to say, I feel like Texas has done, over the last decade, has done real damage to the Big 12.
There's no question about that. And I think that question of, what does the grass is greener on the other side of the fence mean to a school now? Is it, because it used to be, in my opinion, hey, the grass is greener used to mean, hey, we're going to get into a situation where we feel like we can win at a little bit higher of a rate. Like, given the conference dynamics or in Nebraska's case, you just, went and got the bag. So for Missouri, hey, yeah, you're not relevant. You're nobody in the SEC. And don't talk to me about this past season. You've been nobody in the SEC. And that's fine. But you are making money. So for athletic departments and universities, is grass is greener just simply survival? Hey, let's jump on the train. Let's get into the Big 10 or the SEC. Even if we win absolutely nothing, we're more than happy to do that, because at least then we're getting paid and we can continue to have football games in our stadium. Like, that's what I think the question is right now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what this iteration of the Big 12 ends up being, because I think you have a lot of questions around guys like Joey McGuire at Texas Tech.
Mm-hmm.
That should be the preeminent football brand in the conference. It's not close. It's not close. TCU, huge backslide last year. I don't know. Can Sonny rebuild to what he did 2 years ago with the run to the playoff? And I don't know. I think there's not a lot of confidence. And I look at the attrition of talent. Again, Will Howard at K-State. It's a huge loss for the conference. And Texas on the way out, Oklahoma on the way out. You look at Dion coming into the conference. Obviously, that's a big boost. He needs to win. They need the Big 12 from a branding perspective. It would really help the Big 12 if Colorado found its way to 7-8 wins.
Yeah.
That would be unbelievable. Because I do think in this coming season, it's going to be hard for anybody in this conference to beat Utah. I think Utah, the film that's coming out of spring ball with Brant Keithy looks like a cat that hasn't played football in a year. He looks strong. He looks fast. Talking to people that have seen him, he looks really, really good. Really, really good. If him and Cam's running all over the place in spring ball, if Brant Keithy and Cam Rising are healthy, they're gonna dominate this conference. Not win the conference, dominate the conference.
Yeah, they're pretty much unstoppable when they're healthy.
It's not going to be. It is for this 1 year. Now you're going to have to replace Cam. You're going to have to replace Brant. You're going to have a lot of attrition. This year, this coming season, Utah should dominate this league. I would be disappointed in Utah football if they did not win the conference. It would be if they did not. If Utah doesn't go to the college football playoff this year, I would be disappointed.
100%.
That there's no other place to go.
Well, and to your point, I mean, the Big 12 needs Utah in the college football playoff, like now more than they've ever needed somebody to get it. 100%.
And you're talking about a guy in Cam Rising who's done nothing but defend himself for a year. You want to talk about guys who got something to prove? That's Cam Rising.
Yeah,
he's got a lot to prove. And we'll see. We'll see. We can guess, we can surmise, we can wonder. But I don't think it's even in question now that this conference, the Big 12, lacks a brand. It lacks brand power. It lacks that go-to program. And I think that the real difficult part, if you're a Kansas fan, K-State, TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor, you better win your home games. And Baylor is not easy to beat in Waco. I think we've seen that. But why not? I still can't believe you didn't fire Dave Aranda. I can't believe it. You're a basketball school now. You're a basketball school, period. That's it. Because you're not a football school at all. And it's surprising, shocking, whatever the words you want to use are. All right, let's get to the comment section. As always, presented by our friends at Prize Picks. PrizePicks.com. Make sure you download the app. Did not win last night. Pushed. I have never had a situation where I pushed. 2 out of my 3 selections last night pushed. So I didn't lose. I just didn't win.
Right.
Which I'm appreciative of. But today's a big day on the Prize Picks scene.
Yes.
We've got the PGA Championship teeing off today at Sawgrass. That's always a big one. We've got the Big 12 tournament. How about the Big 12 tournament today? You want to talk about some Big 12 tournament? BYU, even though they're playing at 10 in the morning, and if anybody wants to explain that shit to me, I would appreciate it. How did they win yesterday and BYU winds up playing again at 10 a.m., which, wow. First of all, what the hell happened to Kansas? Did you guys see what Kansas shot from 3 last night?
Dude.
Kansas shot from 3 last night, 15%. They were 3 of 20.
It's garbage.
What are we doing?
They lost.
How?
Kansas is out of the Big 12 tournament, which is amazing to me. You've got BYU and Texas Tech coming up at 10:30 on ESPN2. That's a huge game for BYU. That is, they're favored by 2.5. The total is only 153. I'm a little worried that BYU is so reliant on the 3-point shot. I mean, that's how they ran out to that lead yesterday. But Houston and TCU at 1. You're telling me Cincinnati and Baylor is a better game at 7:30 on ESPN2 than BYU and Texas Tech.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how that how that pans.
Yeah,
I'm
don't.
not sure why BYU. And again, I'm not even a huge BYU fan, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you, hey, BYU and that audience should probably be in prime time.
But what I don't understand is for a TV-driven conference like the Big 12, how are you not having Texas Tech and BYU, Houston and TCU at least close to prime time? Move the Cincinnati Baylor game to 10:30 and just push the whole stack down because number 7 Iowa State is playing at 5:00. It's a bit of a conundrum. Now that's 7, obviously that's 7:00 Eastern, right? It's a little surprising the way that shook out. But so Prize Picks, you can absolutely get BYU basketball and Prize Picks. You can get Big 12 basketball and Prize Picks.
If you're going to do BYU basketball and Prize Picks, you need to be careful with, points. If you're just going to go points, you need to be really careful with that because watching that game yesterday, BYU tends to get run down the court in transition, right? When they're, as you said, they rely on the 3-ball. That leads to a lot of transition points for the other team, and BYU winds up only playing half-court basketball. So I would just be a little careful. But I do think that college basketball and the Big 12 tournament is a lot of fun. There's no doubt about it.
I would also point out tonight in the NBA, there's today is Pie Day for all you dickheads out there. Like, I got to give me a pizza for lunch.
Oh, hey, man. Hey, Monty.
Don't. 3.14. James Harden has to score 3.14 points on Prize Picks.
James Larden.
So Harden, who's actually playing really well. Kawhi Leonard's out, by the way. I think you have to go with that. And Kevin Durant, how about the Suns at Boston today?
Let's go.
Huge game. Suns in Boston, TNT, 7:00. That's a huge game. I got to take Kevin Durant more than 39.5 points. And I'm probably going to, and I don't want to be sensational, guys. Like, that I don't like being over the top and, saying just outrageous things.
Right.
But in the 3-pointers made category, Devin Booker is at 2.5 3-pointers made on a demon. I'm going to have to go more on that. And if he doesn't cash that, I'll just drive a roofing nail through my ball sack. Like,
okay,
I feel like that is the honest, unemotional answer for what I have to deal with on Prize Picks. Not sensational, not trying to be bombastic or anything. Like, that's a normal response, right? Roofing nail, right?
Yeah, roofing nail. Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that is normal, completely normal.
Yes.
It just is what it is.